the Rivers Trust and also the iCatch network for the invitation to come along and speak to you tonight. It's great to be here. My name is Andy Hallewell. I'm Senior Community Water Officer for the Border Region, as Constanza was saying. I've been with LAWPro for about 6 months now, so I'm a relative kind of newbie. My kind of exposure to the Catchment Community Fora model has been fairly recent, but I will do my best to take you through the presentation. It's probably going to last in the region of about 20 minutes, so there should be ample time at the end for questions and answers. As I say, I'll do my best to answer any of the queries that you have. If I can't answer them, then I will go away and try and get the answers for you and come back to Constanza or come back to the iCatch network and bring you that information. So it's really good that it's being recorded, because we can capture all those questions and hopefully the answers as well. So I think we'll get underway here, Constanza. Thank you very much. And so really, just to give you a summary, and apologies if you know some of this already, but the idea of the Community Catchment Fora pilots, wherever you see CCF, that's what that stands for, LAWPro is going to pilot 5 of them to trial implementation and public participation in water governance. And in doing that, we're really responding to 2 things. The first is Article 14 of the Water Framework Directive, and that requires the active involvement of all interested parties in the Water Framework Directive in Ireland. And the second thing is the Water Action Plan, 2024 to 2027, Ireland's 3rd River Basin Management Plan, and that requires increased levels of public participation. And it's assigned LAWPro the responsibility to do this through the establishment of the Community Catchment Fora model. We're working to a timeline, so September 2025 to January 2027 is the period of time in which we have to develop these pilots, trial them out, and capture the findings and report those back. So I thought it was only fair to give a little bit of context before we kind of get into it, and that was really just to mention that there is a body of international best practice, as you may well be aware, which has seen the development of similar type initiatives in other countries. So, for example, we have the Netherlands Water Board model. There's the Environmental Water Advisory Group in New South Wales and Australia. And then latterly, in Finland, the water delegations, which was visited by Constanza and the Rivers Trust very recently. So there's a couple of links in there to some of the extra information. I got a little bit of feedback there, but I think...
Yeah, sorry. So can you make sure, everybody, that your mic is turned off? It's most likely caused by an open mic.
Okay, we'll try that one again. Seems to be okay. Seems to be okay. So, yeah, I put a little infographic there just of the Dutch model. There's obviously something you can look up later if you want to, but I was just it was quite interesting to see it's a very decentralized structure. They have 21 autonomous regional water authorities, and they actually operate independently of both national and municipal governments. And each of those water boards, they have responsibility for things like flood prevention, water quality management, water level management, which of course is very important in the Netherlands because of the flat topography, and also sewage treatment. So there's all kind of brands and flavors of these kind of initiatives that you can see throughout the world. You know, but they often have sort of similar kind of core principles. And no less really, the Catchment Community Fora, some of the ideas that we've borrowed from those other models would include the idea of elected or appointed reps that promote that idea of leadership and management at the local level, promotion of diversity within the fora. LAWPro at the moment, for example, we're really trying to target youth groups. I've been reaching out actually this week to Comal and Naog, and also the young farmers, Macra and the Firma. Excuse my Irish pronunciation, it's not very good. But you know, that principle of diversity is something that we're working quite hard on to bring in kind of sectors which, you know, you might not automatically be thought of as representative. Another example of that actually would be groups like the brewers, actually, who use water, you know, in the catchments, and tourist providers as well. So as well as, agriculture and angling. We want to try and get quite a sort of broad church involved. And all this can contribute to development of policy and best practice. Thanks, Constanza. So I think Constanza had mentioned earlier, the lead-in work that has taken us to where we are now was informed by a Community Catchment Fora scoping report. And on the slide at the bottom, you can see that there is a link to that publicly available document. So once you have this presentation, you can just click on that and you can access it. It was finalised last month. It captured the views and learnings from that lead-in process. And I suppose there was a clear recommendation for the establishment of 5 pilots, CCFs, in the original catchments led by LAWPro. And the pilot implementation plan will be informed by those views and learnings. Thank you, Constanza. Okay, I'm just going to click something here. It's just obscuring my vision here. That's great. Thank you, Constanza. Yeah. So just to summarise the broad objectives of the Community Catchment Forum pilots. So they will be the recruitment of local community groups, to trial a forum-based approach to water quality, to support public participation, and that's really important in terms of the Water Action Plan, but also WFD Article 14, and then to conduct a really thorough evaluation of the pilots, and that's designed to inform a potential national rollout, because I think the long-term plan, if things go well and according to plan, would be to have this type of model available in all 46 catchments across the country. And then lastly as well, to integrate local community catchment management into the process. Thanks, Constanza. So yeah, the scope of the pilot, we have 5 of them, as you know. The time frame is September of this year until January of 2027. We've already really done the stakeholder mapping. That's been done by our community water officers at a local level. The key phases are really the recruitment of the members, holding an initial information meeting, and then setting up the Community Catchment Fora and the evaluation process. And all this is designed to test how communities can best interact with the existing WFD governance structures and the catchment management work plans. And it's all about bringing that community perspective to the table. Thank you, Constanza. I always feel a bit more relaxed when I see a bit of water, especially in these presentations. So I just thought I'd share with you the location of the pilots. So you can see there the lovely River Boyne. They're divided up into the 5 regional sectors of LAWPro. So in the Midlands and the East region, it's the River Boyne. In the Southeast, Slaney and Wexford Harbour. In the border region, it's the Newry, Fane, Glyde and Dee, which we didn't think really tripped off the tongue very well. So we're actually referring to that as the Oriel Community Catchment Forum. And then in the west, it's the southeast portion of Galway Bay. And in the southwest, it's Mal Bay. So those are the 5 pilot locations. Thanks, Constance. Okay, so how were the pilots selected? So there was an assessment of all 46 catchments across the country. And those assessments were made on the basis of water quality and scientific information. But there was also a strong community rationale as well. And we did this really by looking, for example, at the number of community water development fund projects that were active in a particular catchment. Also things like the small grants that were in operation as well. And we thought that gave us a good sort of barometer of the kind of the strength and the activity in those particular catchments. We were looking for catchments that demonstrated a kind of suite or a spectrum of issues and pressures. And also we wanted to have a good mix of local authorities to promote that idea of collaboration between the local authorities and between all the other stakeholders as well. So I suppose, for example, in the border region, with the Oriel catchment, we have Louth and Monaghan County Council are both kind of the 2 local authorities that have a stakeholder presence there. And then, of course, evidence of active agencies in other spheres as well. So, for example, the Rivers Trust Office of Public Works, IFI, National Parks and Wildlife, etc., etc. Thanks, Constanza. So just to look at what the forum model consists of. So primarily, it's about structured public gatherings around natural water management. The fora are designed to operate under and agreed terms of reference. That'll be one of the first tasks of the fledgling CCFs as they get underway. There should be a local chairperson. The local members will be there on a voluntary basis and made up of interested parties and groups and individuals, of course. And it will be an open nomination process. I'll show you the forms in just a minute. All of this will be supported by not just the LAWPro staff on the ground, community water officers, but also at a regional level as well. And the objectives include inclusion, as I mentioned before, is really important, community engagement, and better water quality management. Thanks, Constanza. Okay, so there are kind of stages, of course, in this whole implementation process. And just to give you a kind of a broad brushstroke here, stage one is really complete, which was the project inception and the kickoff. It was the work that led into the scoping report. Where we are at the moment is stage two, which is the implementation of the community catchment fora in the 5 pilots. So it's looking at things like the recruitment of fora members, establishing a CCF, holding the first CCF, information meeting, and then the whole publicity exercise about preparing updates for the website and newsletters. Stage 3 and 4 really kind of run in conjunction, side by side. So the monitoring and evaluation of the CCFs leading towards a final evaluation report. And we'll have an external evaluator who will be appointed quite shortly to conduct that exercise. And then at the same time, stage 4 there is about the ongoing management and oversight of the pilot implementation. So, yeah, we have a group already established called the Implementation Advisory Group. Again, I'll give you a bit more info on that in a minute. And really at the end of the process, the game plan is really to be able to develop a business case for the community catchment fora that can be taken to the department and other stakeholders and to kind of shape a proposal for how these might be rolled out on a national basis. So stage 2, where we're at now, we're just on the cusp of having our first CCF information meetings. They will be taking place at the end of September, kind of beginning of October. So, for example, the Oriel catchment having their first meeting on the 29th of September in Dundalk. And the other regions are just beginning now to finalise their first meeting events. Following that, before the end of the year, there will be an inaugural meeting, and that will be really where just those members that have been nominated will come to that. There will be an opportunity there to try and agree and elect officers to roles like chairperson and secretary. There'll be a whole kind of getting to know you exercise. There will be looking at the draft terms of reference for each pilot catchment. And they'll be looking at the catchment management work plan. And then they're also developing an action plan for each of those community catchment fora. And thereafter, in 2026, we are tasked with having 4 meetings of each of those pilot community catchment fora across the breadth of 2026. Okay, so just a few remarks about the nomination process. So this is something that is going to be promoted by LAWPro. We have 2 different forms developed, which I'll show you in a minute. We will set a deadline for the receipt of those forms, and only those people who have been nominated will be invited to that inaugural CTF meeting before the end of the year. And as mentioned before, we're really striving for a balanced representation within each of those fora. Thank you, Constanza. Okay, so these are the 2 forms for the nomination process. And basically what it is, the form on the left is where you have an individual nominating another individual to be a member of the forum. And on the right-hand side, It's a form for where a group or an organisation would like to nominate an individual to be a member of the forum. But on both forms, you can see there's a short form where the nominee has their details, contact details, address, and a few notes on biography. And then below that, there's the nominee declaration, where they are just indicating that they're accepting the nomination, they understand the processes. Probably the bullet point there that's quite important is that we're asking them to acknowledge the fact that they are not just representing themselves as an individual, or indeed even their origin organisation, but they're really there representing the forum, the wider interests of the forum. At the end of it, they're just they're signing up. Now there's a question popped up there. I don't know if we should take questions at the end. Do you think, Constanza, or do we want to deal with them as we go along, or?
Yeah, I think we return to the questions at the end. If you don't mind, Faith, we've seen your question and we will take it. I think we just keep going for the recording. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks very much, Constanza. Okay. Well, I put a little note at the bottom of each slide. It tells you where you're at. I always like that in the presentations. So we're on 13 out of 20. So we're more than halfway through, which I think is always handy to know. Okay. Thanks, Constanza. Okay. Yeah. So the nomination process, the key roles are the chair and the secretary. But what we have built in is that LAWPro can provide secretarial support on a temporary basis if need be. So if there's any issue about secretary, not being appointed, or indeed, if the forum has just got some additional needs around capacity for secretarial functions, LAWPro can step in and do that. A treasurer isn't really essential in the pilot phase. It's obviously something that each forum will want to have once they're up and established. But during 2026, LAWPro can fulfill that for them. The LAWPro community team will be available to provide ongoing support, administration, coordination throughout the pilot phase. And also important to mention that the Catchment Science Support Team will also be there to provide scientific and practical information on the catchment to each of the fora. Thanks, Constanza. So obviously each forum will have its own terms of reference, which needs to be agreed, but kind of the core aspects of it will be things like forum objectives and responsibilities, the guidelines around membership, how LAWPro will offer support to the forum, and then the governance and decision-making protocols. But the terms of reference itself, is a document that I think is about sort of 5 to 10 pages or so. And then just some notes on the pilot management and oversight. So I think I mentioned there earlier that there is an implementation advisory group, and this comprises LAWPro and Forum Ishka and the DH-LGH Water Action Unit. And that advisory group will hold quarterly meetings to ensure the rollout of the implementation plan for each of the CCFs. The regional LAWPro teams will be responsible for setting up the meetings. The stakeholder mapping is largely complete, but they will also provide those secretariat services to each of the fora as they're required. The DH-LGH Programme Delivery Office, they will track those specific water action plan actions that relate back to the CCF development. So that will be their sort of monitoring and oversight function. And then, as I mentioned before, there will be appointed an external consultant who will be responsible for the overall evaluation and the final report. Thanks, Constanza. Okay, so just a note, further note here on the Water Framework Directive governance integration. And I think we felt it was important to kind of describe here how each of the fora, can, if they need to, they can actually exert some kind of traction in the whole process. Where can they go if they have particular issues and concerns, not just LAWPro, but other structures as well. So each of the CCFs will have links to the LAWPro regional committees. So that's the ROCs, or the Regional Operational Committees, and also the Water and Environment Management Committee meetings as well. And issues and concerns, they can, if necessary, be escalated to other national structures. So, for example, the National Technical Implementation Group, the National Catchment Management Committee, and the Water Policy Advisory Committee. And there are a number of questions that are already kind of being formulated in terms of, what the evaluator will need to consider as they monitor and evaluate the whole rollout of the pilots. So some example questions would be things like, what's the interaction with the local catchment management work plans? What's the interaction with Anfora Mishka and the structures and the representatives? What's the interaction with the local rivers trusts? Not least of all, and to consider how the 5 regional CCF structures are developed in parallel. So there's obviously, they're going to have different hues and different flavours in different parts of the country, but, that's the comparison and analysis of how each of them are being rolled out and how they work together is very important. And then finally, to evaluate the scale, scope and structure of the CCFs. Thanks, Constanza. So yeah, the evaluation plan is nothing that you wouldn't expect. It's December 2025 to December 2027. So it's a 2-year process. There'll be an evaluation of the process and the outcomes. Recommendations will also include feedback from stakeholders, and it will be undertaken by external consultants. Thanks, Constanza. And final slide, it's just really the next steps. So those information meetings, end of September, beginning of October, the nomination process for members and officer roles, the inaugural meeting by the end of the year when those members and officers will be elected, including the chair and secretary. There will be running in parallel regular meetings of the Implementation Advisory Group. And I think this is also important here, is to say that all the minutes of the Community Catchment Fora and the Information Advisory Group will be publicly available on the LAWPro portal. And I've put a link in there already because the first meeting of the IAG was in July, and you can peruse those minutes by clicking on that link. And as we go along, it will be populated by all the various minutes from the different fora. And then finally, we'll be making presentations on progress to Anfora Mishka and other agencies as needed. So thank you very much for listening to my ramblings there. I hope I've given you enough time for questions and answers. I think we have a bit, slightly over half an hour left, Constanza. So very happy to